Welcome to another episode of the Robinson Hewitt Pod. This is where we talk about the future of technology and what it will mean to be human in the next era of tech. I'm your host, Alison Mackey. I'm a futurist, an anthropologist of emerging technology, and founder of Robinson Hewitt Consulting. Welcome. So last week, a corporate real estate executive gave a speech at a humanities graduation ceremony. She started by praising Jeff Bezos and talking about how AI was the future, then expressed genuine shock when she was booed. And I can't stop thinking about it because I know exactly how those graduates felt. I too am a humanities graduate, and what all of my biggest educational career milestones have happened during global crises, from 9/11 to GFC to COVID. And I know what it's like to pursue a dream of studying the arts and being told that it's a waste of time and that you should be studying something useful instead. But as a veteran in this space who has defied all logic and built a career in tech purely because I understand humans on a deep level, this commencement speech was such a clear and unintentional illustration of everything that is wrong with how we talk to young people about their futures right now. So here was a room full of people who have just spent years studying literature, philosophy, languages, cultural theory, and human systems, and they were being sent into a world with a speech of how exciting AI was going to be for their careers. And naturally, the clip went viral. Students who were there posted about it on Reddit with comments calling it astonishingly out of touch. And someone joked that AI must have written a speech for her as well, which, you know what, seems entirely plausible. And I want to talk about why the frustration in the room was completely valid, because I also think that the framing and rhetoric that most of these students are holding at the moment comes from an old belief system that has been imposed on humanities students for decades. And in my biased view, they're probably among the people who will be most likely to flourish in the future. They just haven't been given the permission to believe it yet. So today we're talking about education, who it was designed for, what it's gotten wrong over the years, and what it could become in the next era. We are going to be talking about AI, but not as a threat, but more as a catalyst. One that is going to force transformation across every structural failure in our educational systems that we've been carrying for a very long time. And we're going to be talking about what all of us can bring to the table in this moment, because I think it is considerably more than people realize. So let's look at the current state of play of education. So the reaction to the speech wasn't about AI alone. What I think it was what AI represents to a lot of people entering the workforce and what they've believed education has been about all this time. So art students, humanities students, language students, these are all cohorts watching their industries restructure in real time. They are watching companies replace copywriters, illustrators, researchers, and entry-level analysts with tools that cost a fraction of a salary. So when you have a real estate agent walk into an environment and tell humanities students that disruption is exciting without acknowledging the uncertainty underneath it all, of course the room is going to react. And as an anthropologist in the emerging tech space, I've been saying this for years, well before ChatGPT was even a concept, so I'll say it again today. If you believe that AI can replace what you do not know your value. And that's the first place you have to start with. And I often say this not to cause panic, but to open a door and give a moment to ask yourself a very difficult question. What do you actually bring to the world that is irreplaceable and lights you up? And if you can't answer that clearly today, that's totally understandable, and I don't blame you. Most of us were never given the permission, support, or safety to genuinely pursue what we're naturally drawn towards studying or even building. And that goes far beyond education. So our systems, be it educational, cultural, economic, were never designed to help people discover that answer for themselves. So if we want to take a look into the future, we have to take a little look into the past. So our education system, at least in the Western world, was not one that was designed for a world that we're entering. It was designed for a completely different one. And if you trace it back, Western formal education as a mass institution grew out of the Industrial Revolution. So before widespread schooling, learning was often apprenticed, communal, religious, and deeply local. Children learned by doing within communities, trades, and cultural traditions. Knowledge was embedded in context and passed down through generations. Then industrialization needed workers. It needed people who could show up reliably, follow instructions, process information in standardized ways, and operate within these hierarchies. So the school system was built to produce exactly that. We had bells that signaled when to move, desks were reliant on rows, and one teacher was assigned to teach to a passive group. So everything was centered around passing tests and progressing to the next level. The system was so efficient at producing a certain kind of person for a certain type of economy, and then we just kept going. And even as the economy has changed, technology has evolved, and our nature of work has transformed, the structure of education has largely remained intact. But then we started to add computers and then the internet, digital literacy programs were created, but the underlying philosophy stayed the same. Education is something that happens to you in a building in a sequence from someone who knows more than you until you're certified to go out and get a job. And that philosophy is kind of stuck. And when I was studying my master's in teaching and learning, I actually wrote my research on religion and spirituality in schools and its impact on our partnerships and relationships with each other. And what I kept coming back to was that the most important learning moments were not the ones where content was being delivered. They were the moments where the students felt belonging, agency, and connection to something larger than just a lesson plan. And I know my research kind of came off as a little bit woo-woo and controversial at points. It was still very foundational. So a student who feels like they belong in a learning environment is actually a student that learns. And a student who feels their identity, background, beliefs, and curiosity that are genuinely welcomed in a room is a student who engages. Take that away, and what you get is compliance, not education. And the system persistently optimizes for compliance. I've also been rewatching Harry Potter at the moment, and there's a great moment in the Order of Phoenix where Professor Umbridge takes over Defense Against the Dark Arts and tells the students that they'll only be learning theory, not practice or application, just enough to pass the examinations, because apparently that's what school's all about. And the students, quite rightly, think that this is absurd and dangerous because they know that there is a war coming. They know that the real world is not going to test them with a multi-choice paper or an essay, so they form Dumbledore's army to teach each other the practical skills that the institution refuses to provide. And I think about that a lot when I look at what's happening in education right now. The institution is teaching theory to a world that no longer exists, and the students know it. The boos at the graduation ceremony almost felt like a moment like this, where they're saying, this is not good enough and we know it. Because they know that we're sending these kids into the game of life without even preparing them for it, with a $50,000 student loan debt as well. So here's a few of my visions of what education could be in the future. So what does it look like when we design education around how humans actually learn rather than around what institutions find convenient to teach? And I want to preface that before we can even start to think about educational technologies, we need to firstly shift our foundational approaches to education. Otherwise, we're just building tech for an old world. So let's get the foundations right, so we can get the future right too. So my research and long-term vision has consistently pointed to a few directions. The first is belonging. Learning happens in communities, and it happens when students feel that they are who they truly are, not just what they can memorize. So this is why I've spent so much time researching the role of holistic beliefs and cultural identities in schools. When students can bring their whole selves into their learning environment, they engage totally differently. And that sense of belonging doesn't just affect well-being, it also affects their capacity to think critically, take intellectual risks, and stay curious. And the second is agency. One of the most powerful things that you can give a learner is the experience of making a real choice with real consequences in a safe environment. So this is not a test with one correct answer, but a situation where critical thinking can shape out any outcome. So this is why project-based learning connected to real-world challenges is often so much more effective than an abstract problem set, because it's real. The stakes are real, and so the engagement with it becomes real too. And the third is lifelong orientation. So we currently design education as though it ends when you graduate, and anything after that becomes self-directed or employer-led. But we are moving into an era where the skills that matter will shift multiple times throughout your life. If you leave education having been trained only to receive knowledge rather than seek it out, then the next 40 years are going to be incredibly difficult. And this is why I've been such an advocate for how universities operate and seeing a defined shift in two aspects. The first is an increase in intensive one-year skills-based master's programs that are practical, applied, and tutorial driven. This is high-level learning delivered in condensed and focused forms. The second is opening up research access to people working independently or within industry so that lifelong learners can engage with university networks, resources, and mentorships without committing to a full postgraduate degree. So if we can bridge that gap, it can make people feel more connected to research, make learning something that we return to, not just something that you have to escape from. And for children, the principles are not actually that different, really. One of the most effective things a parent or a teacher can do is meet a child where their excitement already exists and build learning from there, rather than trying to force their excitement into the shape of some sort of curriculum. So when you teach through what actually lights them up, you're not just teaching them content, you're teaching them that learning is something that they actively participate in, not just something that happens to them in a classroom. And that orientation where curiosity becomes a reflex rather than a burden may be one of the most valuable things you can give a young person entering a future that will require continuous curiosity and adaptation. The challenge model matters too here. So when children learn to approach difficulty with curiosity rather than fear, they carry that mindset into adulthood. So it's about asking, what is this trying to teach me? And understanding what the opportunity is within that obstacle. And this is a trainable cognitive habit that if it starts young, it will set them straight for life. So what are the actions we can take today to prepare for the future of education? So if you are a humanities graduate or a parent trying to prepare your child for a world that you can't predict, or someone in the middle of their career wondering what comes next, here is exactly what I would do to start. Firstly, and this is more targeted towards secondary and university level students, is to stop identifying education as something that only exists to produce employment. Of course, work matters and our economic stability matters, but reducing learning purely to a labor market value is part of what created this crisis in the first place. Education is also how we build meaning, develop identity, understand other people, build culture, ask ethical questions, and learn how to participate in society. And ironically, many of those things have been dismissed for decades as impractical, such as philosophy, anthropology, literature, history, art, and ethics. These are the very things helping people make sense of what this technological revolution actually means. So instead of asking, will this make me employable? I think the better question is, what does this help me understand about being human? Because I think that scales so much more beyond a career cycle. And again, if AI can replicate the tasks associated with your role, then your value cannot live entirely within those tasks. Your value lives in your judgment, your relationships, your contextual understanding, your ethical reasoning, your ability to hold complexity and communicate that to other humans. And these are the things that in humanities trainings help us develop. They are also extraordinarily difficult to automate because they require lived human experience. And the problem is you didn't study the wrong thing. The problem is that nobody clearly explained what you actually learned to do or how to articulate it in a world trained to value technical skills above everything else. But those skills still matter. You simply need to reapply them in new ways. Your lived experiences are all relevant. And second, if you have children or work with young people, start thinking about how to teach them through excitement rather than spite of learning. Ask what they're naturally curious about and build from there. Create opportunities where they can experience the consequences of choices in safe environments before they face them in the real world. And third, if you are at the stage where further learning makes sense, look out for programs that are practical, applied, and time conscious. And I'm not talking about the random courses resources that you see from a social media guru with no educational background. Don't get me started on that. What I'm seeing instead is the growing investment in intensive one-year models and industry-linked research opportunities, particularly as institutions begin reckoning with the fact that locked away knowledge doesn't serve anyone. So pay attention to those shifts and be ready to move when the opportunity appears. Follow that thread of excitement. And honestly, spend some time thinking about what you're genuinely curious about too. So not only what will make you employable, although that matters, but what you actually want to understand about the world. Because I have a deep belief that the people who will navigate the next era aren't necessarily the ones who learned the most useful skills for 2026. They are the ones who stayed curious, kept learning, and found meaning in the pursuit itself rather than just a credential. So corporations are not going to solve this for you. Your old boss is not going to solve this for you. And algorithms are not going to solve this for you either. But you do have more tools available than any other previous generation. We have access to research, communities, platforms for building in public, and networks of people that are thinking about the same things that you are. So my ask today is whether you are oriented to use them. This is the real educational shift we've been waiting for. It's not simply better tools, but a fundamentally different relationship with learning itself. So what happened at that graduation ceremony is going to keep happening in different rooms and different forms as the gap between where the institutions are and where the world is already moving towards will widen. The students who booed were totally right that something's broken and they deserve better than a speech praising Jeff Bezos. But they also deserve better than a narrative that AI is simply the enemy and that resistance is the only possible response. The more interesting story that we could be telling is that we're entering a moment where the skills that have been historically undervalued, the human skills, the interpretive, the relational, ethical, and creative ones, are becoming more important, not less. So the question is whether the people who possess those skills know it yet, and if they're willing to position themselves accordingly rather than just waiting for institutions or the external world to validate them first. And I could go even further into the economics and the future technologies of all of this, as I believe that the future of technology and edtech are such an enabler of these fundamental shifts, but that deserves its own futuristic, idealistic breakdown in a future episode. So if today's episode got you thinking, you can come along and join your journey with us. We post nearly every day on Instagram, sharing our insights for future-facing leaders and founders ready for the next era. It's a good place to stay curious. And if you are ready to go deeper, you can head over to our website at RobinsonHewitt.com. We work at the intersection of anthropology, emerging technology, and long-term systems change, helping the future-facing leaders, founders, and businesses transform, evolve, and build the next era. If you're still orienting, you can find our free For the Curious resources. And if you're ready to take the leap, you can see our services as well. Make sure to subscribe so that you can stay up to date in helping build a better future for everyone. Everything is linked below, and I will see you in the next one. Ciao.